Welcome back to the Midnight Mystery Archive, and we are continuing on our Amy Bradley series. And I've got a special guest with me today, and I think she is one of the most important eyewitnesses in Amy's story because of what she saw the morning that Amy disappeared. And I am joined today by one of the two girls who saw Yellow and Amy heading up the glass elevator on the morning of the 24th, Lori. Lori, thank you so much for joining me.
You are welcome. Glad to be here.
So, Lori, we're going to jump right into it.
Okay.
And one of the first things I want to ask you about is you have a unique perspective. One, because you were on the cruise, but
Yes.
two, because you had had interactions with both Amy and Yellow prior to that morning. Can
Yes.
you share some of your recollections about the interactions or experiences you had had with both prior to that morning?
On the ship, Yellow, he was in a band on the ship. And, prior to that morning, he had tried to talk to my friend and I on, several occasions. And, I kind of got the feeling that Yellow liked to talk to all of the young girls on the ship. But I never really had any conversations with him other than, just something brief. He would speak and, not to be rude. I mean, I would speak, but, it never went any further than that. And Amy, I had I can't remember exactly when I met Amy, what day that was. I know we were actually on the same airplane going down to Puerto Rico to get on the ship. And I remember Amy on the ship because this was in March. And, I remember having winter clothes on flying down there. And I remember she had changed clothes. And I can see why she did because, we got down there and it was like almost 100 degrees. But this was my first vacation. This is the first time I had gone anywhere. So I did not really know what to expect. But, and there on the ship, there really wasn't like a lot of younger people. So, my friend and I, we were 18 years old at the time. And the younger crowd, we just kind of, we were friendly with each other. And at some point, I had met Brad and Amy. And that night before she went missing, she was with Yellow in the nightclub. And we were up there my friend and I, we went up there like basically every night. And I'd noticed Amy and Yellow up in the nightclub together. That night, I don't remember any interaction with them, but I do remember seeing them together. And I thought it was strange that night that they were together.
Do you recall what it was that you saw that struck you as strange?
Just the fact that they were together, because Yellow to me, he kinda gave off a certain vibe that, I felt like he wanted to talk to all the young girls, and, to be quite honest, I mean, he kinda gave off a creepy vibe. So, I thought it was strange, but, just because I thought that he may have been creepy doesn't mean that Amy thought he was creepy. So, just my personal take on it. I thought it was just a strange situation.
Yeah, and I've spoken to some other folks too, especially people that know Amy.
Yes.
And one of the things that they have shared, especially when they see the video that Chris Fenwick had,
Yes.
some have made the statement that they've seen Amy drinking. And the impression was that was not Amy being under the influence, that maybe there was something else at play. And you consider some of the other statements that people have made kind of similar to yours, where he kind of gave off a vibe that made some of the girls uncomfortable.
Yes.
It begs questions. That's not an accusation of anything, but
Right.
it lends itself to the idea that it just felt off.
Yes. Yes,
and it sounds like that was your experience.
yes, I agree with that, yes.
So, you see them that night, early morning, in the
Yes,
Viking lounge, they're dancing.
yes,
We've seen the tapes.
right,
Early that morning, talking somewhere between around 5:36,
yes.
you and your friend are, hanging out early morning, and you saw something that I think is really interesting. Can you kinda share what you saw that morning?
That morning, Crystal and I decided that we just weren't sleepy. We're 18-year-old kids on this big cruise ship. And, I know this was the first vacation that I had ever gone on, but, we were just excited to be there. And, everything was just, it was great. We hardly slept any really, but for some reason that morning we decided to go out on that top deck, the pool deck, I think is what they called it, but we sat out there on those lounge chairs. I remember Crystal laying in the lounge chair, and I was sitting sideways to where, I could talk to her. And we were out there for just a few minutes. And I remember I look over to my right and I saw Yellow and Amy go up in that glass elevator. I'm not sure where they got on this elevator, but this glass elevator, it went straight up to the Viking Lounge. The nightclub was kind of built out over the deck, kind of. They go up in this elevator together. And it was a few minutes later that Yellow come walking to my left. I'm not sure if it was the back of the boat or the front of the boat. I know the Viking Lounge was built out over, like, it kinda hovered over a little bit, but I can't remember if I was facing the front of the boat or the back of the boat, but whichever I was facing, I saw him in the distance, come walking from the front or the back of the boat, and to my left, he walked in our direction. He was alone. Amy was not with him at that point, and in that elevator, that was the last time that I ever saw Amy.
So, you see them in the glass elevator, and I think one of the questions that people often have is, reflecting back on that, how certain are you that it was Amy in yellow?
1,000% certainty. I've been asked that question so often, and, it's been so many years that, I may not remember the fine details, but in every interview I've ever given, I will go to my grave knowing 100% certainty of what I saw. It was definitely Yellow, and it was definitely Amy that was in that elevator that morning that went up to the Viking Lounge, and it was Yellow that, I saw to my left come walking from whichever it was, the front of the boat or the back of the boat, alone after he had departed with Amy, or whatever happened in that Viking Lounge. He came down alone, and that is the last time that I saw Amy.
Now, when you see Douglas, probably within minutes later by himself, do you
Yes.
recall what he was doing? Was he doing anything different? Did he have anything about his demeanor, the look, that maybe gave you a sense that perhaps something had happened?
He wasn't in my statement that I gave all those years ago. I had said that he had stopped and said something to us like, "Why are we out there at that time?" Now today, I don't recall that. What I do recall, I remember seeing him walk toward us. He was walking, kind of fast. And, when I just remember he wasn't like, I think I would have remembered if he had been like super friendly with us like he had been, because, I remember the other times that he was creepy and I just wanted to get away from him. But in my statement that I gave all those years ago, he had stopped and said something to the effect of, just wanting to know why we were out there at that time. And I remember shortly after seeing him that I told Crystal that I was ready to go back to the room. At that time, the situation just didn't feel right. Amy was grown, and seeing her in yellow in that elevator was not in she did not appear to be in any distress, and he was not she did not appear to be in any trouble at all. And, like I said earlier, just because I thought he gave off a creepy vibe doesn't mean that she did. So, at that time, I didn't know what I was witnessing. So it felt off just because, I thought he gave that creepy vibe. But like I said, that's she obviously didn't feel the same way.
Yeah,
So,
so other than seeing them,
yes,
nothing in what you observed struck you as odd.
not at all. No.
Okay.
Now, and I've played it over in my head so many times, and, you know, I've been asked before, like, why I didn't get up right then and go get help. You know, if I had known that I was witnessing what would be, some of her last minutes seen on that ship, then yes, I would have gotten up. But, she, like I said, in the elevator, she was not in any distress. She had been with him in the nightclub that evening. There was just nothing really suspicious to report other than my personal opinion that, I thought he gave off a creepy vibe. So there was nothing to report. And if I could change it all now, yes, absolutely. I would have gotten up and found someone. But unfortunately that wasn't the case back then. So
Yeah, hindsight being 2020, I think we can all look back and say, "Oh gosh, we should have done this at this time."
yes.
You can't we can't go back in time, right?
Yes.
So it's just it is what it is.
Yeah.
But I can also understand kind of that feeling that you have as well, like, "Gosh, I wish I knew."
Yes.
That's really the last sighting of Amy, which is, it's pretty heady stuff. Now the question becomes, when did you and Crystal find out that Amy was missing?
Can't remember. At some point, we were off of the ship for that day. I I don't remember. I remember seeing that picture that they had printed and put on everyone's door. I remember seeing that picture somewhere, and I remember taking it off of someone's door, and I told Crystal, I said, "Oh my god, like, we saw her with him." And, it hit me like a ton of bricks in that moment that I had no doubt in my mind that, all of this begins and ends with Yellow, and I've said that all of these years. He knows what happened to her that night, that morning, and, I knew at that moment that, this was not good. This is bad. This is very bad. And I can't remember if I know they I think Crystal recalls it differently. Like, I think we went to find Iva and Brad first. I thought at some point we had found someone that works on the boat and had told them first, but, I can't remember, like, if we saw Iva and Brad first and they took us to someone, or, I can't remember the events around that, but I remember Iva, and I remember telling her what I saw, and I remember her reaction, and I knew something bad had happened. And, it has haunted me for years.
Yeah, I know. I can I can't imagine what that experience is like, especially reflecting back on it. Feel free to take a moment.
It has haunted me for years, and, like we talked about, hindsight.
Yeah.
If I could go back and just, find someone based off of, you know, I thought he was a creep and she shouldn't have been with him. And then, yeah, but that wasn't the case.
I believe the timeline in talking with Brad and Iva is that you and Crystal had reported what you had seen to ship security, and it was at that point, I believe it might have been the next day, that you had had that interaction with Brad and Iva. And one of the things that I'm curious to clarify is I believe, and you can correct me, was it your aunt or was it Crystal's aunt that had kind of encouraged you once she was aware that you had seen them, encouraged you to go make a report? Do you recall that?
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
I what I remember is finding that picture
Yeah.
and, thinking to myself, we need to tell somebody this. I don't really remember, going to tell her family the story or, tell anyone the story really other than, finding someone that could help. Um,
Do you recall what their reaction was to you speaking to them?
to the ship.
Yeah, somebody on the ship. Was it, because I get the impression that to some degree they were flippant about it initially. And I'm curious if that was your experience when you had actually spoken to somebody.
I think that they really did not want to take us seriously. And not only the ship, the FBI. I think what I was told was the one FBI agent said that we were nothing more than, was it two little drunk, rich white girls on this vacation? And yeah, they didn't take us seriously.
Yeah, nice to see the FBI of all agencies would
Yeah,
have that approach. That's actually quite shameful. Do you recall who that agent was?
I do.
Do you?
It was the male agent. And yeah, he was I think he was pretty done with me after he had asked a certain question and I replied truthfully, and I think after that he was pretty much done with me. But, the ball was dropped so many places. You know, the FBI, the cruise personnel, the, Royal Caribbean. There's just so much I feel that could have gone differently, could have, things could have happened differently. And, there's been so much time that's passed and it's just it's very unfortunate the way this is all played out. It's been very unfortunate.
Yeah, it has been. And like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today and
Yeah.
share some of your recollections. And, your experience is one of the most important parts of this story. And to hear you speak about how ship security and the FBI treated your report and your information is indicative of systemic failures from the very beginning. And I think
Yes.
is one of the biggest contributing factors that here we sit 28 years after the fact, even having to have this conversation.
Yes. And that morning, that night in the nightclub and that morning that I saw them in the elevator, I was not drunk. And, if the FBI thought that, I was just some drunk little girl, why not? I mean, I would have consented to any testing they wanted to, put me through to, that I could assure them that I was not drunk. And I know what I saw. Even couple years later, the FBI, of course, a different agent, he came to my work and he wanted me to ID Yellow in a photo, and, there was no question. I mean, that's a face that I will never forget, and, I know what I saw.
I think that's where you leave it. You know what you saw,
I do.
and I really appreciate it. Again, Lori,
Yeah,
feel free if you ever have any questions, you wanna talk, you have a recollection of something else that you experienced,
okay.
I'm happy to discuss it with you.
Yeah, okay.
If you have information about Amy Bradley's disappearance, please contact the FBI at 1-800 call FBI or submit a tip at tips.fbi.gov. Tips can be submitted anonymously. The FBI reward is now $100,000. For more on Amy and the family's ongoing search, visit amybradleyismissing.com. There, you can also submit tips as well, and I encourage you to do it. Links to that site, as well as the Amy Alerts petition, are in the show notes. During the full run of this series, 100% of commissions through our Invisaware Personal Safety Partnership go directly to the Bradley family's GoFundMe. Get 10% off your first order using the link invisaware.com/MidnightMysteryArchive, also linked in the show notes, and support the show at no extra cost too by shopping through our Amazon link, also in the show notes and linked on our website homepage. Follow the Midnight Mystery Archive on Substack, X, or join our official Facebook group for updates. Another thing you can do that I would really appreciate is a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, which goes a long way in helping us grow our audience, bring new ears to Amy's case.